The hospital room smelled sharply of antiseptic, mingled with the faint sweetness of newborn powder. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and through the large windows, the late morning sun slanted across the pale walls, making the space feel unreal, almost suspended in time. I sat in the stiff chair beside my baby's crib, my hands trembling as I stared at the tiny, fragile life swaddled in pastel blue. Every sigh, every tiny grasp of her fingers, filled me with a warmth I'd never known before. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times holding her, seeing her for the first time, feeling a love that would overshadow every fear, every mistake I'd made. And yet, nothing had prepared me for the way my heart could also fracture. The door swung open, my father stepped in, his presence always commanding, like a storm about to break. I had called him, nervously, hoping he would share in the joy, that maybe, just maybe, he had softened with age. He smiled, just slightly, but his eyes didn't reach mine. They scanned the room, resting on my newborn daughter. "Oh, she looks unusual," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. His words were casual, almost careless, but they struck me like a knife. Unusual, fragile, tiny imperfections laid bare under his gaze. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. My joy evaporated into a cold pit of disbelief. I blinked, unsure I had heard correctly. What do you mean?" My voice shook. He leaned back, uncaring, as if this were nothing more than a passing observation. "I mean, look at that nose, and the way her head tilts. It's odd. Not quite right. I suppose some people are born like that." I wanted to yell, to grab him by the collar and make him understand the weight of his cruelty, but the words stuck in my throat. I had always known he was blunt, sometimes cruel in jest, but this was different. It wasn't a joke. It was a deliberate, cold dismissal of the most precious life I had ever held. My daughter, sensing perhaps the tension, let out a small, confused wail. I instinctively reached for her, pulling her close, my heart hammering in protective fury. "She's perfect." I whispered, not just to her, but to myself, as if saying it loud enough would drown out my father's words. He laughed softly, dismissive, shaking his head. "I don't know why you make such a fuss over a baby. She's just a baby." His tone was casual, like he didn't realize how sharp the edge of his words had been, but I did. I felt it deep in my chest, a betrayal sharper than anything I'd imagined. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the tile floor. "Excuse me," I muttered, my voice steadier than I felt. My legs carried me away from him before my mind could stop them, to a quiet corner of the hallway where the soft buzz of fluorescent lights was less oppressive. I needed air. I needed to breathe. Alone, leaning against the cold wall, I finally let the anger and hurt rise freely. I had imagined this day as one of warmth, of family, of shared joy. Instead, it had been tainted by mockery, by a man who should have been a grandfather, not a judge of perfection. The betrayal burned. It wasn't just that he had mocked my baby, it was the casual cruelty, the thoughtlessness that cut deeper than words. I clenched my fists, feeling a determination rise inside me, quiet and steady, like the first spark of a fire. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The nights were the hardest, while the city outside my window buzzed with life. Inside my small apartment, time seemed to stretch and twist. My daughter slept fitfully in her crib, tiny whimpers punctuating the darkness, and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The memory of my father's words at the hospital replayed relentlessly in my mind. Unusual, not quite right. Every syllable was a dagger I couldn't remove, a betrayal that had cut deeper than any argument or disagreement we had ever had. I had always known my father could be cold. His love was measured, conditional, sometimes more about appearances than heart. But mocking a newborn, a tiny, defenseless human who hadn't yet learned to cry, to smile, to live, that crossed a line. And yet, in the quiet of the night, as I held my daughter close and felt her tiny fingers curl around mine, a strange energy began to build inside me. Anger, hurt, determination. It was a quiet storm, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment. I began to remember the subtle ways he had controlled our family over the years, the sharp words disguised as jokes, the judgmental glances, the manipulations hidden behind concern. And then a thought surfaced that made my heart beat faster. I could protect my daughter from that toxicity. I could make him understand, in a way he would never forget, that cruelty had consequences. It wasn't about money at first. Not entirely. It was about power, about reclaiming control over a narrative he had always tried to dominate. I started small, quietly. I changed passwords, updated accounts, secured the family information he assumed he had access to. Every night, I learned more about how to protect myself and my daughter, and about how to wield influence without overt confrontation. Each small action felt like a step toward balance, toward justice, but the real thrill came from planning. I wasn't acting impulsively. I was patient. I began documenting everything: his cruel jokes, his manipulations, the way he dismissed the people he was supposed to care for. Every slight, every remark, every mocking glance would become evidence, a testament to the man he truly was. And in the back of my mind, a plan began to form, carefully, elegantly, with the precision of someone who had waited decades for the perfect moment. During the day, I smiled. I was warm, attentive, gentle. My daughter cooed at me, her tiny eyes following my every movement, and I felt the bond between us grow stronger with each passing hour. But inside, there was a fire. I imagined the day I would reveal my quiet triumph, the day when he would realize that the child he had mocked would be the reason for his own shock, his own humiliation. There were moments when doubt crept in. Was I becoming the very thing I despised, calculating, vengeful? But every time my daughter reached for me, her tiny hands grasping my finger, I reminded myself why. This wasn't about cruelty. This was about justice, about setting boundaries, about ensuring that my child would grow in love, not judgment. And so the quiet storm raged on inside me. The world outside moved at its normal pace, but inside, I was building something stronger than anger. A plan, a shield, a promise. When the time came, my father would realize that words, no matter how sharp, could be met with actions far more powerful. I tucked my daughter in, brushing a strand of hair from her tiny forehead. "You're perfect," I whispered, louder this time, letting it echo not just for her, but for me. My father's mockery would not touch her, not now, not ever. The fire inside me settled into a steady, controlled burn. And I knew patience would be my weapon, and one day he would see it. The invitation was casual, almost careless. A Saturday brunch, I told him, smiling in a way that belied the storm simmering beneath. My father, as always, accepted, confident in his assumed control, unaware that the tables had quietly turned. He arrived that morning in his usual polished attire, eyes scanning the room, pride and arrogance etched into every line of his face. He expected warmth, perhaps a chance to assert dominance. Instead, he found me calm, composed, and radiating an ease that made him uncomfortable without him knowing why. My daughter was in her high chair, her tiny hands reaching for the spoon I held. She giggled, a soft, pure sound that seemed to illuminate the room. For a brief moment, I let my father admire her, let him think he could simply walk into this space and reclaim some semblance of authority. But I could see it already, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes flicked from her to me, searching for weaknesses where none existed. We ate, the conversation light, but carefully guided by me. I spoke of work, of achievements he had never expected me to reach. I casually mentioned projects, investments, and milestones that were only partly true, deliberately crafted to create an image of independence and success. His brow furrowed, tiny cracks forming in his confident facade. He tried to comment, to assert his presence, but I had built an invisible fortress around myself, one he could no longer penetrate. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the subtle, sweet unveiling of my plan. I handed him an envelope, labeled in plain handwriting. "I think it's time you checked this," I said softly, my voice calm, almost tender. He looked at me, confused, the smirk on his face faltering. What is this?" he asked. "Your account," I said, and that was all. Just 5 words. But they carried the weight of months of planning, patience, and the quiet fire that had grown inside me since the hospital room. He opened it slowly, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he scanned the pages inside. Numbers, balances, transfers, carefully orchestrated, legally and ethically impeccable, yet devastating. His eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again. His face drained of color, the arrogance replaced by shock, disbelief, and dare, I hope. A flicker of fear. You did this, he whispered, voice shaking. I did. I replied, my tone gentle, almost loving. And not for revenge alone, but for protection, for clarity, for respect. You mocked her when she was the most vulnerable, the most innocent, and now you see the consequences of underestimating her family. He went white, unable to speak. The air between us was thick with unspoken truths, long, held grudges, and the quiet justice that had finally arrived. For a moment, I felt the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed, not cruelly, not violently, but with precision, intelligence, and the patience of someone who had been hurt and refused to remain powerless. My daughter reached up, tugging at my sleeve, and I scooped her into my arms. She giggled, the sound ringing like music. My father looked from her to me, and I realized that, despite the shock, the true victory wasn't in his fear. It was in the knowledge that she was safe, cherished, and shielded from his cruelty. Remember, I said softly, as he continued to stare, pale and defeated, words have weight. So do actions. Choose both wisely. He nodded slowly, silently, the arrogance gone, replaced by a fragile, hollow acknowledgement. The storm inside me settled, leaving a bittersweet calm. Revenge had been sweet, calculated, and just, but it was also a reminder of the cost of cruelty, the fragility of trust, and the strength of love. And as I held my daughter, feeling her heartbeat against mine, I knew this chapter of our lives was over. But the lesson would linger, for him, for me, and most importantly, for her. The apartment was quiet, the kind of deep, comforting quiet that comes only after the chaos of a long day. Outside, the city hummed, but inside, everything was still. My daughter slept peacefully in her crib, wrapped in a soft blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling with each slow, even breath. I sat nearby, my hands folded in my lap, watching her with a tenderness that no words could capture. The events of the past weeks played over in my mind like a storm slowly settling. The hospital, my father's mocking words, the fire of anger that had driven me to act everything had led to this moment. And now, as I watched my child sleep, I felt a profound clarity. Revenge had been sweet, calculated, and complete, but it had also been exhausting. The real victory wasn't in the shock I had seen in my father's eyes, but in the knowledge that my daughter was safe, cherished, and surrounded by love. I thought about him, my father, who had once seemed untouchable, whose words had carried the weight of judgment and cruelty. He had been defeated, not by force, but by foresight, patience, and the quiet assertion of boundaries he had long ignored. And yet, even as I felt a flicker of satisfaction, I also felt something unexpected, a subtle melancholy. Revenge, I realized, was a bitter-sweet gift. It healed one part of the soul, but it left another raw, a reminder of the hurt that had sparked it in the first place. I rose and walked to the crib, kneeling beside my daughter. Her tiny fingers twitched, and she murmured softly, half asleep, half in dream. I stroked her cheek gently, marveling at the perfection in her imperfection, the innocence that no one could taint. The memory of my father's words at the hospital no longer carried the sting it once had. His mockery had been powerless from the moment I decided to protect this child. Love, I realized, was far stronger than anger. It was quieter, deeper, and enduring. I had acted out of rage, yes, but my actions had been guided by love. The fierce, protective love of a parent determined to shield a child from harm. And that love, I knew, would shape her life in ways no bitterness or cruelty ever could. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of both the past and the present. The quiet storm that had once raged within me had settled into a steady flame, one that would keep me vigilant but also allow me to enjoy the joy I had fought so hard to preserve. I thought about the future, about the years ahead, and I felt a strange lightness. The past could not be erased, but it could inform the present, guiding my choices with clarity and strength. As I rocked her gently in my arms, I whispered softly, "You're perfect, and nothing, no words, no actions from anyone, can ever change that." Her eyes fluttered open, meeting mine with trust and curiosity, and I felt a rush of emotion that transcended everything else. Relief, gratitude, and the kind of love that could move mountains. I knew my father would eventually fade from these intimate moments, a cautionary figure in the background of our lives. He had been given a lesson, one I hoped he would remember, but my focus was no longer on him. It was on this tiny, breathing miracle in my arms, on the life we were building together, safe, tender, and full of promise. The city lights outside twinkled like distant stars, and for the first time in weeks, I felt completely at peace. The past had taught me hard lessons, but the present offered hope. And in my daughter's soft, steady breathing, I found not just comfort, but a reminder that love, patient, fierce, and unwavering, was the ultimate revenge against cruelty. I kissed her forehead, letting the warmth of the moment fill me. The chapter of betrayal was closed, and the chapter of healing, of love, of real joy, had begun.